Panasonic offers a variety of advanced autofocus capabilities for still photography on S-series cameras and select G-series cameras. Let's take a look at what they are and how to utilize them. We'll start by making sure that your camera is in autofocus mode. There's actually a few different ways to switch this around. Depending on the lens you have, you may have an autofocus switch on the lens barrel itself. Or if you're using one of the LUMIX Pro lenses, you may have a mechanical clutch on the lens, meaning that you pull the lens collar back, as you're seeing in this video here, and push it back forward to switch between autofocus and manual. You'll also find an autofocus switch on the camera itself. You'll find that here as you switch from manual focus through the different autofocus settings. I'm going to set it to single autofocus now. Now let's jump into the different autofocus modes. The first mode we'll look at is called pinpoint. This is designed for studio photography with a non-moving subject. So for example, the camera's on a tripod and you're shooting a still life or some other locked off subject. This mode isn't even available if you're in autofocus continuous. What this mode does is allows you to pick a very precise area of the subject to focus on. So for example here, I'll activate the mode and I can move the joystick to precisely position the focus area. And then when I press the shutter halfway, it actually zooms in on the back of the camera to show me a closer up view of that area so I can confirm precise focus. The next mode is the one area mode. One area is, like it sounds, a single area that you define in your scene where you want the camera to focus on. So for here, if I go into the autofocus area movement, I can set that area to be exactly where I want it to be. That means that the camera is only going to look within that box to look for areas to focus on. You can actually change the size of the box as well by simply scrolling on the back wheel here and changing the size of that as you change the position. There's a variation to this mode where you can add in human or human and animal detection. Interestingly, this means that if a human or an animal enters the scene, anywhere in the scene, not just in that box, the camera will default to focusing to them. So if you have a one area focused on a particular spot of the scene, and someone walks into frame, the camera will switch to focusing on them. As soon as they leave frame, the camera will return to focusing just on that one area. There's an expanded mode for one area called One Area Plus. I'll switch to this mode, and you'll see when I select it that the box that is the one area actually has a secondary box around it. This is kind of a fallback area, if you will. You have your primary area inside of the box, but if your subject temporarily moves out of that, but they're still within the fallback area, then the camera will maintain focus on them and won't immediately look for something new to focus on. So think of it as a one area with just a little bit of wiggle room. This mode also has the human and animal detection options to it. The next focus mode is called the oval. This allows me to basically choose an area in the scene that is roughly oval shaped where I want the focus to be concentrated on. And as you can see here, I can change the size of that oval by moving this dial. The next mode is a zone mode called vertical or horizontal. This allows me to have from a single horizontal or single vertical line, which I can change the size of by moving this dial here, that the camera is focusing on. I can change the orientation by simply moving up or down on the command dial. And again, I can change the size of that like so. The next mode is 225 area. This is the most automatic mode, where essentially the camera is looking at the entire scene, broken down to 225 zones, and looking for whatever it thinks should be in focus. The next mode is focus tracking mode. This is quite an interesting mode, where the camera will lock focus on a subject, and then as that subject moves around, the camera will track it. I'm going to show you how this works by simply moving these pencils around on the scene. Obviously, in a real-world situation, you would have a live subject moving around. But this way I can show you how it works. So the first thing I have to do is switch the camera from single focus to continuous focus mode. If the camera's in single focus, then it's not going to continuously focus and not going to track the subject. So you have to put it in AFC. Then, from the focus mode, while in tracking mode, I'll push down to activate the tracker, and then from here I can choose what part of the scene I want to track. In this case, again, I'm going to go ahead and choose the pencils. Now what I'm going to do is press the shutter halfway. And once I press it halfway, I'll hold it down and you're going to see that it has locked onto the pencils. Then I'm going to reach over and move the pencils around and you'll see on the back of the camera how the tracker tracks it. Then I'm going to press the shutter all the way down and start taking a few pictures. You'll see the screen black out momentarily while we see those pictures being created. As it takes those pictures and as I move the subject around, it will continuously track. As soon as I take my finger off of the shutter button, and I'll tell you when I do that, you'll see that the focus tracker is reset back to the middle of the scene. So let's try this out. I'll press the shutter halfway. It is now tracked onto that subject. Now as I move it around, you can see that it is holding onto that, and I'll start taking pictures. And as I move it around, it keeps tracking on that. Now I'm going to take my finger off of the shutter button, And it has reset the tracking position, waiting for something else to enter the scene, where if I press the shutter halfway, it locks onto that again, and we're back in business. So that is how the autofocus tracking works. It can take a little getting used to, but it is incredibly powerful, and once you get the hang of it, it can be very, very accurate. The next mode is human and animal detection. This mode allows me to choose between either human and animal, or just human detection. And this is actually one of the most versatile modes in the camera system. This mode, first of all, is looking for humans or animals in the scene. But if it doesn't see any of those, it's going to default to the 225 area mode, meaning that it's going to look for anything in the scene that it thinks should be in focus. But then at any point, you can instantly switch to one area mode by either pushing on the joystick or simply tapping the back of the screen, like this. I'm in human detection mode. As you can see, there's no people in the scene, so we're not seeing a person in there. But as I hold down the autofocus button, it is trying to focus using the 225 area. But if I want to go to a single area, I can simply tap the joystick, and suddenly I'm in single area mode, and I can position that wherever I want. And I can also do that by touching on the LCD here. This is incredibly versatile, allowing me to go from people mode to general 225 to single zone just by touching the joystick on the back. There are more advanced functions and capabilities in this mode that I went into extensively in a video titled Autofocus for Video. So if you're interested in learning more about that, I encourage you to watch that video. For now, let's take a look at some additional settings on this camera. In the menu system, under Custom, go to the AF or Focus Shutter page, where you'll find a bunch of different options allowing you to control various aspects of autofocus. I'm not going to go into all of those in this video, but I encourage you to read the manual for your camera model to see exactly what your camera is capable of. There's some great features in here, and many of them you might find very useful for your shooting situations. But there is a couple things in here that I do want to show you. Let's go down to where it says Show or Hide Autofocus Mode. This allows me to hide specific autofocus modes that I may not want to use. Let's say that I never want to use the zone vertical horizontal mode. I can simply hide that, and now when I go into the autofocus mode menu, that option is no longer available. It just helps sometimes to clean up the menus. But if I go back into that menu again, you'll find if I scroll all the way down that there's actually a few that are off by default, Custom 1, 2, and 3. The custom autofocus modes allow me to define a very customized area using any of the 225 zones that I want the camera to focus on. And they don't even have to be contiguous. Take a look at this. I'll go back into the AF mode and choose C1 for Custom 1, push up on the command dial to go into the Save mode, and now I can move using the joystick, the little crosshair around, and when I push down on that, it defines that area as an area to focus on. I can do it by moving the joystick and tapping, or I can even just tap on the screen with my finger and paint in on the LCD wherever I want it to focus on. Once I've defined a focus area, I press the Q button to set it, and we can now see that focus area set there. And I can even go in here and move that focus area around if I wanted to. So it is an extremely versatile focus control where you can set up exactly where in the scene you want the camera to focus on. Now let's take a look at some customization settings we have for autofocus itself. Go back into the menu, navigate up to the Photo menu, and then under Focus, go to Autofocus Custom Settings for Photo. You'll see in here that we have 4 different autofocus settings: Set 1, Set 2, Set 3, and Set 4. These are all completely customizable, and I'm going to take you through what each of these options do right now. Let's go back to Set 1. You'll see under Set 1 that there is a description at the bottom that says Versatile and Basic Setting. This is the default setting, which is where you're going to want to leave your autofocus settings the majority of the time. But as you're going to see, there are some interesting options in here that you might want to consider. Let's go to Set 2. Set 2 describes it as suggested for situations where the subject moves at a constant speed in one direction. What would that mean? Well, think of it as planes, trains, and automobiles, things that are moving in a constant speed in a constant direction. So what is the difference between this mode and the standard mode? Well, let's take a look. You'll see that we have 3 options to control: AF sensitivity, AF area switching sensitivity, and moving subject prediction. Let's start at the top, AF sensitivity. The options here are locked on at -2 up to responsive at +2. This is how responsive the camera is going to be to changes in the subject's position. As they move forward or backward, or even as other subjects cross the path of the primary subject, how quickly will the camera respond to those changes? Is it going to try to refocus as soon as something moves or changes, or is it going to assume that the subject is roughly in the same area and probably going to stay there even as something may cross the scene? So if you're trying to shoot a person and you have other people walking in front of them, you're going to want this to be quite locked on, as opposed to if you want to have somebody moving in front of the scene and having the camera jump to them, you'll want to have it be more responsive. So again, the default setting for Set 1 is AF sensitivity at 0, right in the middle, And for set 2, it's actually just at +1, just making it a little bit more responsive. The next option is AF area switching sensitivity. Think about in the 225 zone shooting, how you have all these different autofocus areas. As your subject moves in and out of a predefined area or the area where they were originally acquired in, how quickly should the camera change which zone it's going to use to focus on? That's what this controls. So again, here it's set to -1, meaning it is more locked on, as opposed to set 1, where it was at its default of 0. The last option is moving subject prediction. Is the subject moving at a constant speed or a variable speed? A constant speed meaning that plane, that train, that automobile, versus a variable speed, someone like a football player. Since this was described as a suggestion for situations where the subject moves at a constant speed in one direction, it makes sense that the moving subject prediction is set to constant. But now let's take a look at set 3. Set 3 is defined as suggested when subject is moving randomly and other objects may be in the scene. Imagine a team sport situation like basketball or football where you have a lot of people on the field and they're all moving in random directions at random speeds. This is an ideal set for that type of situation. Let's take a look at the settings. You have under autofocus sensitivity, it's set on a little bit on the lower side to locked on because you do want to track an individual player and probably not want to switch to another player too quickly. The autofocus area switching sensitivity is up to +1 because your subject is likely going to be moving around the frame quite a bit and moving in and out of where you initially acquired them. And then the moving subject prediction is set to variable because there's likely to be a lot of movement, a lot of changes in the speed of the person you're tracking. The next mode, set 4, is very, very similar. It's described as suggested for situations where the speed of the subject changes significantly. And you'll notice if we go between set 4 and set 3 that the only difference is autofocus sensitivity goes from 0 to -1 for set 3. Essentially, the difference here would be something like gymnastics, where you do have varying speed, but you're not really worried about other players jumping in front of the one that you're trying to photograph. So with all of this in mind, you can customize your autofocus settings to suit your particular needs. And I encourage you to experiment with these. There's no right or wrong way. It's always going to depend on your situation. And once you dial this in for your particular shooting style, you're going to love the autofocus capabilities in your LUMIX camera.
Panasonic.